Hey guys, you're listening to this week's episode. For exclusive content, Q&As, and more, check us out on Patreon. What's up, guys? Welcome to the Swear to God podcast. Looks like we're in the apocalypse now, but first let's enjoy that double shot espresso, am I right? Every week we dive into culture and conversation to chew the flavor out of, from politics in Washington to pop culture in Hollywood. If you know who Mitch McConnell is but still spend most of your rent money on concert tickets, you are not alone. You're in the right place, my friend. Welcome to the Sinners Club. I'm really excited about this next guest. He's actually celebrating his 2-year podcasting milestone, so congratulations to Jimmy Davis of the Moderate podcast. His voice is unique in that he aims to deliver a truly objective perspective when it comes to politics. Jimmy dissects politics from a variety of views, with some entertainment and sports talk mixed in. He has new shows every Sunday at noon Pacific, so look for those links wherever you're listening to this show. Without further ado, Jimmy Davis. Okay, let's jump right into it. So, Jimmy, thank you so much for coming on the pod. I wanted to talk a little bit about you and your podcast first and ask how you got into podcasting and why the moderate and the objective perspective, because I think that's really necessary in this space and it's really important. And I even find myself kind of getting lost in the milieu sometimes. So can you just speak to that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, so I've been doing, this is not my first podcast. I've done several in the past. I did a bowling podcast in the early 2010s. I did a
Nice.
podcast with my wife. Yeah, with my wife and a friend of hers. But pre-kids, my kids were born in late 2009. So before when we had more free time is when we started doing that. My first experience in radio, believe it or not, was when I was like 5 years old, and there was a woman in her early 20s that lived down the street from me, and she'd always see me outside with a microphone. So she's like, "Hey, do you want to go on the radio?" I'd be like, "Yeah, that'd be great." So she was a producer for a radio station in LA, and so they brought me in. I was a guest a couple of times on the show there, and
No way.
yeah, so that was pretty cool. And then I worked for the college radio station when I was in college in the early 2000s. It was kind of they were
Did you have a music show, or was it politics then too?
it was a actually it was a German podcast. It wasn't in German language, but
Okay.
it was like a German heritage type podcast or a show. But I also worked for the sports side of things. So I did some basketball games, some baseball games. We had a really good baseball team. So
Nice.
that was exciting. So I got to do some color and play by play, and I grew up playing baseball, so that was kind of a natural fit. So I've had plenty of experience in the radio space, but the reason I started this podcast, and actually it'll be 2 years tomorrow from when we're yeah,
Congratulations.
thank you.
That's a big milestone. That's
Yeah.
huge.
So I'll be posting my first podcast on Twitter tomorrow, just as a kind of a happy anniversary to myself.
Right on.
And so, but I started the show because, I thought that there was just that voice was missing that's in the middle where I think a majority of people actually sit. And I think that
Hmm.
people that are either apolitical or people that, are reasonable, because I think that over the last probably 10 years or so, I would say, is when we've really seen this shift to the edges of the political spectrum as social media has become more and more prominent in our discourse. It used to be, the things you don't discuss are religion and politics, right?
Right.
The things you don't
Right.
discuss. And now that's all we do. It seems like
Yep.
especially on social media. And so I wanted just to kind of bring things back to perspective, bring things back to maybe where people are reasonable and not just driven by, purely by political ideology, because it seems like both sides these days have to bend themselves into a pretzel to defend their position in some respects. It's like your side does not have to be right about everything.
Right.
And
That's so hard for people to admit, isn't it?
absolutely. That's a big part of the problem. So, if you listen to my show enough, you're going to hear me criticize the president plenty of times, because there's a lot to criticize. And I think that he's done more damage. I listened to a podcast by John Ziegler called the Individual One Podcast, and
Okay.
he's based out of LA. I mean, he's from the East Coast, but he's based in LA now. and his podcast is all about the president. He's very conservative, but he is definitely not. He's not a never Trumper. I wouldn't say. It's not like he criticizes Trump 24/7. If he does something right, he'll give him credit for it. But he has said, and I tend to agree with this, that he has probably done more to damage conservatism in the United States than Hillary Clinton would have as president. If anything, his position is she might have strengthened the movement because
Right. That makes sense to me.
yeah, because I think under Barack Obama, I think is when we really start to see the discourse especially on the right, and that was a big product of why in the conservative media, and that's why we saw a victory for Donald Trump because they played up Obama like this evil America hating,
The Antichrist.
yeah, Antichrist, Exactly, and I just to me, that was the start of it, and then once Trump came in, then it seemed like the left did the same thing on Trump. Now, again, I am no fan of Trump, I am not voting for him in November, but I also believe that they've gone so far over the edge that the left has done more to keep Trump in the race than Trump has done himself. And I believe 4 more years of Trump could be very damaging to this country, no doubt about it, because Trump without the need to be reelected is, I think, a dangerous proposition.
Absolutely.
But on the other hand, it's kinda like, the way I voted for Bush twice.
Okay.
I
I wasn't of voting age when Bush was
Oh,
elected.
see, I'm a little older than you, so yeah.
Yeah. My first election I can vote for, I was 18 and I voted for Obama in '08. So
Okay,
that was my
okay,
first election I could participate in.
gotcha, okay. So that gives me a perspective, okay, that's
Yeah.
good. So, I voted for him, and I think that sometimes I believe he gets a bad rap, but I think that he was very beatable in 2004. And what did the Democrats do? They run John Kerry against him. It's like, "Really? That's all you've got?" But when with Obama, you had somebody that people were voting for, and I think that was the first time in a long time, and I think even Clinton, you could argue, was somebody that you're voting for, very moderate. He was he was forced to come to the middle. I think that he was already moderate.
Clinton was or
Yeah,
Obama?
Clinton
Yeah.
was.
Mhm.
And he was moderate to begin with, but because he had to work with a Republican Congress in, the middle of his first term, that even brought him more to the middle, and he was willing to shift on his stances on things and make compromises and things like that. And that's what we're missing now. We're completely devoid of any kind of compromise on either side. And I think that's really where we've gone wrong. And I think that's what that's one of our biggest challenges. And so I'm trying to bring a perspective saying, hey, you can criticize Trump, but at the same time, you don't necessarily have to give up you have to sell your soul to do it. You know what I'm saying? It's just, I don't know. To me, I think there's a big vacuum, a big void that, and I think, and I'm listening to your podcast, I think that you're probably, a little more liberal than I am.
Sure, yeah,
But
that's fair.
but that doesn't mean, though, that we can't have an intelligent, reasonable conversation and see other's perspectives, and I think that's where a lot of people are. I think if you look at Twitter and Facebook, you don't see that a lot because I think
Oh,
people like us.
Twitter.
I know, it's just insane. So, I think that you know, you see that, and I think the most boisterous people are the people on the extremes, and that's why
Yeah.
and that's kind of where and then people just don't wanna engage in that, and people just kinda, give up because they care, but they don't care enough to do it. But deep down, I think that there's millions of people just like us that can look at things and look at it from not just through such a tilted lens, so to speak. So that's what I'm trying to accomplish with my program.
I couldn't agree more, and I so appreciate it, and I wonder how many people feel this way too, and they are the voices that get lost, right? I question how people who are sort of battling with some of their beliefs or trying to figure out where they stand on some issues, how they participate in that dialogue when they just get shouted down,
Right.
right? When the loudest and most extreme voices won't even allow them to participate. And it seemed to become so binary, and there's this bifurcation. Everything is politicized. So even if I believe like I did an episode on free speech, and I was really critical of Democrats and said you need to be the party of free speech, and you need to allow people with dissenting voices and stances that are different than yours to speak. You know, like they should come to college campuses and get that platform, or else it's really detrimental to the party. And I see that in so many macro patterns in our national politics. And I agree. I don't think that if you trust polling, I don't think that the data shows that most Americans are on those fringes. I think most Americans, there's a lot of overlap and crossover in things that we could sort of come to terms with each other on these policies.
Right, right. And I think that, I get, primary politics, you have to kind of, serve. And if you want to get ahead in your party's primary, you do have to go more towards the base.
Right.
But typically what we've seen in the past is that once you get that primary, then you start to move towards the middle to try to get those undecided voters.
I feel bad starting with that, like, oh, we should be more bipartisan. And then I have this massive question about Trump wanting to move the election. Um, but I think I was really impacted by it. I have a friend from Venezuela. He's living and working in the States now. He is so anti-socialist, socialism. He's very moderate and conservative. And he's been worried about kind of the media cycle and what Trump will do with the election and if he will leave. And I think Trump's tweet, just questioning that, putting that question out there was a red flag for me. And I was really impacted by it. But I'm also trying to not respond to it in just an emotional way.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get your thoughts on that. And we obviously know that he's not legally able to do that on his own, right? How do you interpret him saying that on Twitter and the Republican response to it?
Well, I think it's absolutely ridiculous. It's the stupidest thing I've heard. And I mean, you look at there are states that already do vote by mail 100%. Then just today, so he goes from I just saw a tweet from him today. I wanted to make sure I kept it here. I just look at it from an entertainment value at this point because it's otherwise it will drive you crazy.
Yeah,
He goes, whether you whether you call it vote by mail or absentee voting, in Florida, the election system is safe and secure, tried and true. Florida's voting system has been cleaned up. We defeated Democrats' attempts to change. So in Florida, I encourage all to request a ballot and vote by mail. Hashtag MAGA. For fuck's sake. I mean,
oh my goodness.
it's like, so because he votes in Florida. Oh,
Right.
Florida, they've got it. They're
That's the
good. They've got
exception.
they got it right.
Yeah.
And ironically, you remember they were the most fucked up state in the year 2000.
Oh my God. Yes.
So like, so now you're sitting there saying, okay, now Florida's like has the best system. Like
Right.
really, they're always the ones that have issues, always.
Right.
And
It's like the
and
cousin you don't want to talk to at Thanksgiving.
someone's
You
got to
know?
save that tweet because right now there is a possibility he's going to lose Florida. And if he loses Florida and it's not by a lot, he's going to say, "Oh my God, it's all about fraud." And I demand a recount, blah blah blah. Like, dude, look at your freaking tweet, man.
Right. There's always a tweet. There's
There's
always a
always a
tweet.
tweet. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, and even Republicans are like, no, no, we're not doing that. I mean, it's playing to the base. Again, I don't know if he believes half the crap that he says, but it plays to the most basic instincts of the people in his base.
Right.
And why he's doing that, I have no idea because he's got them. You've already got them. You don't need to convince them anymore.
Mhm.
You can say whatever you want. His biggest sycophants are like, "Yeah, you tell him, president." Like, what the fuck?
Right. There's no continuity. It all seems fragmented. I do wonder if that is to sort of generate some fervor leading up to the election, so they're more impassioned, more emotional turmoil. Like he said, this was going to happen,
Right.
and it takes away from the integrity of the election, which makes people more willing to question the election, and it subverts our democratic process in ways that I think are really unhealthy and dangerous. But I did appreciate, I was a bit worried how the GOP would respond if they responded at all. But Mitch McConnell came out and he said unequivocally, no, we are not moving the date of the election.
Right, yeah. And Mitch McConnell, I mean, he is first and foremost a politician. And he
Oh,
has
yeah.
also come out and said, "Hey, if you need to ditch the president in order to win your seat, then by all means feel free to do so."
Go for it.
Yeah,
Yep.
because he cares more about keeping his majority in Senate. He cares more about his job than Trump's job. That's the bottom line, and he always has been just a politician first and caring about his position first.
And we see how effective he's been at that as well. He knows how to use political capital.
Right, whether you agree with him or not, he knows what the hell he's doing, and that's the same thing you could
He's
say
good
for
at his job.
right, and you know what? And you could say the same thing for Nancy Pelosi on in the House. I mean, she does the same thing. She plays the same game. They all play the same game. And Trump doesn't know how to play that game because he's an outsider, and that's part of the problem, is that if you don't know how to play the game, you're not gonna be able to get stuff done no matter how I don't know why, again, his base buys the fact that he's done more than any other president ever. It's like,
Right.
based on what? I mean, he had a majority in both, houses of Congress for 2 years and did jack shit with it. And then trying to say that he did a bunch of stuff. It's like, "No, no, you didn't. You did."
Greatest president in the history of ever, right.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't wanna make a broad statement, but I think Americans are not generally as educated on civics as we should be, and, people like you and I, we can get pretty wonky about politics, which I love, but if you take, an average man on the street, I wonder how closely they're tracking these things because vote by mail, if you're not in a state that has done it before or you haven't participated in it before, is it something that you're going to be, oh, I should be tracking this. I should try and get my ballot ahead of time. This is really fascinating to me. What's happening with the post office is really important. Probably, especially now with such economic hardship, a lot of people either aren't able to track that or isn't interested in it. So it seems that he can get away with these statements, and then someone like Bill Barr follows up, and says there is potential for fraud and there could be, on a grand scale, all these envelopes that are being sent. I just don't know how we deal with that. What is the counter mechanism there?
There really, I mean, there isn't one, and it's gonna this election's gonna be just like everything in 2020. It's gonna be unique, and
Mhm.
we're gonna
Yeah,
have to deal with it, and it's gonna we have to accept that, come, the evening of November 3rd, we're not gonna have a result. It's just not
right.
gonna happen. The media's gotta be very and as I mentioned on my last podcast, the media's gotta be really careful about how they call this thing, especially if Biden
Yeah.
wins.
I
They
appreciated you saying that. That was a really prescient point. Yeah.
because yeah, I mean, but what I think what a lot of people don't understand, and I work in local government, so that's what I do for a living, and
Mhm.
I think what people don't understand is the biggest challenge isn't necessarily with the postal service. To me, the biggest challenge is gonna be with the individual registrars. So there's varying levels of sophistication. I think in a sense, it helps us because there's such even in California, just alone, you have 58 counties, so you have 58 registrars of voters, and so each county has, I mean, they kind of have a overall framework that the state law lays out, but within that, there's a lot of variance as to how they actually execute that system.
I
And
imagine.
so
Yeah.
yeah, and so you have some rural counties that, they don't get as many votes, but they also don't have as much sophisticated systems as some of the bigger counties would, like in LA, Orange County, up in Northern California, San Francisco, Alameda County, those kind of things. But then how each state does it is different. And I believe that, it does go county by county in most states as well. And so, because you have, thousands of counties in the country kind of doing their own thing, that's where the complicating factor comes in. Now, it does help that there's almost makes it almost impossible to commit mass fraud in
Right.
terms of foreign interference. Like you're not going to get, the suggestion that you're going to get foreigners mailing in ballots is ridiculous. This isn't the
Right.
1870s anymore. Okay, I
Yeah.
mean, each
Fair
ballot
point.
in each county looks different, and they'd have to figure out who lives there, what their ballots look like, how they process them, and a lot of this stuff is held by close to the vest. And so but the problem we have is that, they talk about how these rolls are, littered with people that are dead and people that have moved, and so people, may have moved from one county to another, and they registered
Mhm.
there, and they never took them off the rolls in their old county. There's all these different problems, and that's because registrars tend to be very, very underfunded and understaffed.
I bet.
So
I can only
it's not
imagine.
that they're not committing any fraud, it's just that they don't have the personnel to really go in there and do a good job of cleaning up those rolls. That's the problem.
Do you know of, I mean, we're so close to the election, I wonder if there's even time to shore up that process, but do you know of any states or counties that are putting more infrastructure together, or more resources into that process?
I believe the county I work in, Orange County, again, it's a bigger county, pretty wealthy county.
Yeah,
They've done a good job of that. I know LA County has had some issues. They had, a much higher percentage of registered voters than they probably should have. They've gone through and cleaned those up. But again, I don't think there has been. I think that's where, if you're talking about funding, if you need relief funding in terms of a coronavirus relief bill, that's where that money should be going, is to registrars of voters, because those are where the elections are decided. Those are the boots on the ground that actually process this stuff. They set the thing up and they process and they count all the votes and they do the audits. I think that you gotta beef up the staff that counts the votes, and you got to beef up the staff that oversees it and audits it. I think that it should be a bipartisan. I think that each political
100%.
party should have representatives on site. Because, by the way, anybody has the right. I don't know how it is in other states, but in California, if you wanted to show up to your registrar of voters and watch them count votes, you have the right to do that.
No shit, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So
Interesting.
and
Huh.
so that's another reason that the notion that fraud is happening is kind of ridiculous, because it's a very open process. Anybody can go observe it. So if you have concerns about this fraud, this rigging of an election, go do something about it. Volunteer with your registrar. Go watch
Yeah.
the count. Go be
Monitor the
involved in the
process.
process.
Yeah.
Exactly. You have
Yeah.
the right to do that. So
And I think that would be a really interesting way to become more involved in the democratic process of voting, right? I mean, that would be a really fascinating thing for me, as nerdy
yeah,
as I am, to go participate in. Yeah, it's so frustrating when you read about companies like Kanye West's clothing brand receiving how many millions of dollars from that government package. And then we have this problem, which is so much more meaningful and impactful across the board. And then the added layer of, during COVID, we're going to have to figure out ways for those people that are going through the envelopes to be safe and do that in, as productive as of a manner as possible.
right. Yeah, exactly.
I think that just generally from an emotional standpoint, one of my biggest frustrations with Trump's stance on this is the hypocrisy element. There have been so many records indicating, I think, what was it, 12 of his officials in his administration have participated in casting absentee ballots and voting by mail. But for some reason, now, when he knows he's in trouble, the process is problematic.
Right, right.
And that narrative seems to be catching on in a lot of places, even though there aren't facts to back it up.
He is so insulated by his base from this argument because, quite frankly, you can make up any narrative you want. Now, you can pull out examples where there's been fraud, but there's so few of them, and there's such isolated incidents, and if you look at all of them on across the spectrum, it's about 50-50 Republican and Democrat. So
Right, which is important.
right. So, I mean, it's gonna even if there is some fraud happening in small little pockets, again, it's just a massive conspiracy theory, like all these other conspiracy theories. It's like, you believe that there's this many people that can keep this kind of secret?
Right.
Really?
And that they're
Makes no
capable of
logical
pulling
sense.
this off. And then I know that this is more of a general question and a hypothetical because we don't know what's going to happen in November. But one of the concerns I have is this sort of questioning of the process and the legitimacy of the election results. Do you think that that dies with Trump, or could that potentially spill over into future elections, 4 years from now? Is that sort of tone and approach in the media to covering elections, do you think that goes away? Do you think that changes how we approach this process?
I don't think so. I think it's gonna take multiple, election cycles to get away from this. But I think you kinda hit the nail on the head. His reaction to this election and already kind of setting up his loss and explaining why he lost, is why this is gonna continue, because his base, especially if it's a close election, I mean, if he
Right.
gets trounced, then maybe it starts to go away and the conservative movement maybe moves on and tries to do something else, because I think that if they can't win with Trump again and they get floored, and they just completely get their ass kicked, then they're gonna have to change gears, and I think that you're gonna see that. But if it's a close election, and all signs indicate that it will be, I don't think this is going away because they're gonna beat the drum just like they did during Obama's tenure. It's gonna be the same thing, and come 2024, it's gonna be the same reaction from the right. So I don't think this is gonna go away. You know, a 2020 thing would be a tie in the electoral college, right?
Oh god, yeah, I hadn't even thought of that.
And then it goes to Congress. You could have a possibility. Now, this is a very, very small possibility, but you could have a possibility where the House, because it would be the new House that would select the president, because right now, even though the Democrats have a majority, and I pointed that out in my last podcast, a listener pointed out to me that, hey, wait a minute, the way that they do it is a little bit different. Each state gets one vote. So you basically figure the majority in each state is going to go for their party. Well, right
Right.
now, there's 26 states that have a majority Republicans, 23 Democrat, and one that has an equal number. That's Pennsylvania. Florida has a 14-13 majority for the Republicans. That if one seat flips there, one seat flips in Pennsylvania,
Mhm.
that's 25-25.
Wow.
Now, you keep voting until you resolve the tie. So if someone comes up with a compromise and says, "Hey, if you get, like, let's say Liz Cheney to flip, because she is the only vote in Wyoming. If you get Liz Cheney to flip, now all of a sudden you could have a Biden presidency. The
Mhm.
vice president is chosen by the Senate, and each senator gets a pick. So let's say the Republicans keep the majority in the Senate, they could pick the vice president. So you could have a situation
Whoa.
where you have a Joe Biden presidency with Mike Pence as
Oh
the
my
vice president.
goodness. Is that the unity ticket everyone has been talking about?
That would be some crazy shit. Now, again,
Wow.
the odds of that happening are really, really, really small.
For sure.
But if there's any year it'll happen, it would be 2020.
Exactly. Exactly. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That is so much to unpack. We shall see. We shall see. Yeah, all I can do is implore people to make sure they're registered and know what that process is like. Another issue that I wanted to bring up with you is the issue of Russian bounties. The Russians potentially paying the Taliban to kill US troops in Afghanistan. I think that there are a number of issues to unpack. A, the intelligence being leaked. B, Trump's response to it. C, Congress's response to it. I myself personally am not necessarily surprised by that intel. I think it's an escalation in a long history between the United States and Russia in that area, and with their history in Syria. This dates back to when Russia was in Afghanistan and the Mujahideen. But I think the lack of response from Trump and his refusal to at least make a statement accepting some sort of responsibility or acknowledging that he will deal with the issue if the intelligence has been confirmed, that to me would be like the baseline level of response I would hope for from a president. If
Right.
Obama had been president and this had happened, or John McCain, even, you would assume that he would say, "Hey, one American soldier lost is a problem. We need to confirm this, and I'm going to speak with leadership about it." What are your thoughts on that whole evolution?
Well, I'm not necessarily convinced that Trump did know, because it's not a question of whether he's a Russian patsy, it's a question of his competence. It is very well known that he does not read his daily brief, and that they only brief him on the quote unquote really important stuff. So I think that this is not a presidency like any other, where a normal president who reads this crap and would say, "Well, what the fuck is this?"
Yeah.
And can you give me some more information on it? And they're like, "You know what? The intelligence is a little bit iffy on it. We're still looking into it." Like, well, yeah,
Which intelligence is often,
right.
right?
Well, exactly, and that's the
Hmm.
thing, right? So I think what they do is they really pick and choose the stuff that they wanna bring to him, and they don't bring him stuff that they think is gonna upset him. So anything that has to do with Russia, they tend to hold back. So when you talk about the deep state almost has to be there because otherwise Trump's not gonna do anything. So now the denials out of the administration, um, that yes, if it's true and, and there is good reason to believe that it is,
Yeah.
then yeah, there needs to be a reaction. Now, having said that, there could be the possibility that they're denying it in public and that there is something going on behind the scenes covertly that by denying it, they can keep the Russians off guard because that anything that Russian intelligence knows way more about our government than we do. Because if anything that we say publicly and, we want our government to be transparent, we want everything to be known, we wanna know what's going on, but everything that we know, our enemies know, and they know even more than we do. So, there is the possibility, and not again, this is a hypothetical, that the denial is happening in the public because there is a covert operation going on behind the scenes that we're not aware of. That is a possibility. Is it likely? Probably not. But there's also this, that one of big Trump's big pushes, one of his big campaign promises was to pull troops out of Afghanistan.
Yes.
And I do
Yes.
find it funny that all of a sudden now we have a bipartisan group in Congress that is basically restricting his ability to withdraw troops, which I don't understand because how do they have the ability to restrict withdrawal for troops that they didn't authorize to be there in the first place?
Right. Oh, that's fucked.
I mean, like, usually it's Congress that's supposed to declare war and
War.
do all these things, and so
Yeah.
we're still in a state of war with Korea. I mean, that never actually ended,
Yeah,
and
informally. Yeah.
right, no, never formally. But then we have all these other conflicts that have been done through either the Patriot Act or other, the slow eroding of Congress's power and ceding it to the president, which
Mhm.
to me, like, if I think if Biden wanted to unite the country, one of the first things they would do is they'd try to start scaling back on the powers that have been granted to the president by the Congress over time and start balancing the power balance back out because they always do it when their guy's in charge or their woman's in charge. So that
Right.
if it's all Democrats, they want to give more power to the Democratic president, not thinking down the line that, you know what, there might be a Republican there one day.
What
And we're
goes
gonna go
around comes around.
exactly. And so, I think when they like what's with the Patriot Act, right? The Patriot Act comes into being, and then all of a sudden now Obama's president and the Republicans are like, oh shit, we didn't think about that.
Mhm.
And now you've got Trump in there, and you're like, what the so, I mean, it's amazing to me that that kind of thing has happened over time, and the in Congress has just given them this power. It's not even like it was taken from them. They gave it away willingly. And once that it's hard to undo that because the only time you can do that is if you have all three of the branches. You got the House, you got the Senate, you got the presidency. The only time you're gonna be able to get that kind of thing done. But then why would you be willing to do that when you have all the power, right?
Right.
So,
Absolutely.
you have to have somebody that has the wherewithal to has the mindset of a George Washington to say, "I don't want this power." They
Right.
want to give him the power, and he said, "No, I don't want it. That's the whole point of what we're doing here."
This isn't appropriate. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and if someone ran on that ticket, sign me up. I
Right.
mean, if
A Democrat that believes in smaller presidential powers, which means potentially smaller government. What is that?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the unicorn candidate right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But as far as the Russians, scandal again, obviously that is an escalation that was not even done during the first Cold War, and now we're in the second Cold War, and it could be argued that the first Cold War never ended. It just kind of there was a lull in it, and
Right.
then it just came back up because Putin's still part of that old KGB crowd. So
Absolutely.
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me, and it wouldn't surprise me that they would try to do it under Trump. It's
So
because
nefarious.
they just know how to manipulate him, whether
Yeah.
it's Putin or Xi, they know how to
Yes.
manipulate him. They just kiss his ass, If you long as you just kiss his ass, he'll give you whatever you want.
Yeah, flatter him. Here's the playbook.
It's
Make him
really
feel
not
like
that hard.
king.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's and that
yeah.
and to me, that's the most dangerous thing to me is that it's that these other, these dictators know how to get on his good graces, and that's the problem. That's the big problem that we have.
Not to reference my Venezuelan friend again, but I think it's appropriate because he saw, what happened with Maduro in his country. And he said, it starts with the expansion of the presidential power and, cozying up to other dictators, questioning the free press, right?
Right.
Questioning validity of elections. There's a lot of parallels, and I'm not saying the same thing is happening here, but he just has expressed to me, he's like, I hope there are debates. I hope that the election actually happens and that Trump doesn't move it. And this is just one piece in that puzzle that makes me concerned. But I do hope that there will be those checks on his actions, right? I don't think that there are many GOP members of Congress or Democratic members of Congress that are willing to sit on their hands when there's a direct threat against troops in Afghanistan, right? It just
Yeah.
goes against their politics, their moral code. It's anti-American. It's not good policy either, right?
No.
Americans aren't for that
No,
at all.
absolutely not.
And then it's bizarre to me to see this whole thing transpire, and we know this information. So, assuming Trump didn't know that, and then he's inviting Russia back into the G7, do you think it's imperative of those people that are working below him, like Deputy National Security Advisor, for example, to then say, hey, hit pause on this, you shouldn't be doing this because we have some information maybe that you need to hear? Where does the responsibility fall? Because I understand that process can be slow and arduous, and they don't want to anger him, and they probably can't trust him with a lot of that decision making. But when is enough enough? And then you have to say, you're the commander in chief and you need to be a grown up about this. We have to share this information with you, and then we have to decide what we're going to do about it.
That's a good question, and that's exactly the dangers of a Trump presidency, because I don't know the answer to that.
Mm,
I don't know the answer to how that works, and I think that, again, that's why I think maybe in the case of Trump, there is maybe this quote unquote deep state because you need it. You need it to actually make sure that things properly function. He doesn't fuck it up too bad. And so, because like I listened to John Bolt. I do audiobooks because I have a relatively long commute. So that's how I read. And so I did listen to John Bolton's book.
you did.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I did, and it's interesting because it talks about how a lot of the times they kinda had to work around him,
Hmm.
and to get things done, and how they brought things to him, and how they, you know, got him to make decisions that would favor their position.
Yeah.
They had to get creative on how they did that, and so they had to kinda work within the system, but work around the system at the same time, so to speak. So, you know, to me, I think that's how they've done it so far. We've seen, his response to the coronavirus, for example, and how he gets into true conflict. If there was like a showdown with the Russians, like a real showdown with the Russians, I don't know what he would do. I don't know how he'd react in that situation. And it's scary to think, and that's one of the reasons that it's like, he didn't have a lot of challenging circumstances in the first 3 years of his presidency.
Right. Right.
So and it's a damn good thing he didn't, and I don't think
Yeah.
we're gonna get that lucky again. So that's why I think it's important. Again, I don't think Joe Biden's the perfect candidate. There are things that I disagree with. I think though that his experience on especially with foreign policy, and that because that was he was a point person for a lot of foreign diplomacy during Obama's administration, and he got that experience. And so I think that's going to be really important going forward if he's elected. And so to bring back those relationships, those strategic partnerships, like we pulled out troops from Germany and
Right.
reallocated them.
Yeah. Fuck NATO, I guess.
Yeah, well, he's always, he would no doubt in my mind that if he's reelected, he is gonna pull us out of NATO.
Yeah. Which is
No,
exactly what Putin wants.
right, exactly, exactly, and we're gonna have now we're gonna align ourselves with China and Russia? That sounds like a
Right.
good idea,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know?
those concentration camps in China, he obviously agrees with, so
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hope you don't take offense to this, but what I'm hearing you describe from John Bolton and, um, part of Trump's administration almost feels Cheney-esque to
Yeah,
me, that
yeah, yeah.
some of that, like, puppeteering because those people are smart and they know
Well,
how
and that's
government
you
works.
know, I read something from I know maybe this is jumping ahead a little bit, but I read something from Tucker Carlson. He's doing, analyzing who Biden's gonna pick as his VP. It is partially on the foreign policy stuff and a lot of the military stuff. Yeah, Bush did defer to him. That's why I didn't have a problem with Bush necessarily. I did have a problem with Dick Cheney. And Dick Cheney, I think that a lot of the things that Bush gets blamed for in terms of like, "Oh, Bush is a war criminal," and things like that, those are all driven by Cheney. They really were.
My final point, which is also an emotionally based one with Trump, I feel like this could be the opportunity for him to truly be a strong man in terms of the military and truly be patriotic. I feel like a lot of it has been posturing for him, and we've seen him, when he was fighting the Gold Star family during the primaries, he bashed John McCain because he doesn't believe in losers because they're POWs on on and on and on. My father is a Vietnam combat veteran, and I can only imagine for people who are in the military, where there are a lot of conservatives are in the military, it would be really difficult for me to square this patriotic, pro-military, draft dodging president with a failure of response with this threat that we see maybe directly killing Americans or potentially has already killed 3 Americans in Afghanistan. So I think there's just like a dearth of accountability there that feels problematic for me for the commander in chief.
Right, yeah. I mean, I think that he's made a lot of decisions, that are questionable in terms of military, posturing and military strategy. He ran on this whole, I'm gonna pull the troops out of, Syria, I'm gonna pull the troops out of Afghanistan and the Middle East in general and all this stuff. And yeah, I don't think that, he's a coward when it comes to the military. Yeah, like you said, he gives this strong man, persona, and that's how his base sees him. And based on what? Because he talks a good game.
Right.
That to me is the epitome of a bully. You talk a good game, but once you stand up to him, they cower.
Mhm.
And he that's is Trump to a T. And I
Yeah.
feel like that's a lot of what to be honest with you, a lot of his strict, the very core of his base has that same mentality. They're all
Mm,
talk and no action.
mm,
And I do see, military folks that do support Trump, but they support the idea of Trump, not the man himself. The idea of what they think he is. But I think you've hit the nail on the head. When push comes to shove, he will cower,
mm.
and he will not make the right decision. I think, Bolton is a hawk, there's no doubt about that. He
Yeah.
demonstrated that plenty of times in his book. I found him to be extremely arrogant, and kinda chauvinistic.
That mustache.
Oh, yeah, the stash, yeah, you gotta get that stash, yeah. Uh, I mean, he but in terms of, he did bring up one specific example where they were gonna go in and do a military operation and heard that there was gonna be obviously you wanna try to minimize casualties, but you can't completely eliminate them, especially if you're trying to secure, because his lack of action led to the deaths of many, many more innocent people
Mm.
when Turkey was just allowed to just basically go run free in the Kurdish territory,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And
Just
so
abandoning the Kurds.
but
Yeah.
the reason he held back was because there was gonna be, a couple, some we were gonna have some deaths, and he's like, "Well, I can't do that then." Like, "Wait, what?"
Interesting.
So your inaction now led to, a tenfold increase of what would have otherwise happened,
Mhm.
and that's what he doesn't understand. That, so, I mean, to me, maybe that shows that he does have a little compassion for life. But I think the real reason that he didn't do it was because of image. He didn't wanna have the image of somebody that killed, quote, unquote, "innocent people," and that it would be attributed to him, and that he didn't accept that. He didn't care about the life. He cared about what it would make him look like.
How it would reflect on him
Correct.
if South,
And
gotcha.
that's the problem. When you're operating, your entire world perspective is based upon how it makes you look. That is the epitome of terrible, terrible leadership. And President of the United States is the ultimate leadership position, whether it's the leader of domestic affairs, whether it's a leader in international affairs. You have to, they look to us for answers. They look to us for decision making, and he just is completely incapable of doing that.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, and I was thinking about, we don't have to dive into this, we can get to the debate club in just a minute, but reports of Jared Kushner and the coronavirus team deciding not to implement the federal strategy because at first there were hotspots in Democratic controlled cities and states. If a Democratic president I had voted for was part of a decision-making process like that was so bipartisan and refused to take care of American citizens simply because they're part of a different political party, I would be horrified and ashamed. It's just unacceptable. You're the president for all American people, and it's not about you and your rating. So I couldn't
Right.
agree more. Hit it! Time for indulgences, ladies and gentlemen. That's what I'm talking about. Wait! We are now paying our penance at the Center's Debate Club.
Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys. Today we're going to talk about Biden's VP pick. I want to chew the flavor out of this one and get your opinion. Who you would like him to select, or who you would think he would select, who he shouldn't select, and why? Any thoughts you have on that?
So, I mean, there are plenty of qualified candidates. We know what his criteria is, in terms of, he wants an African American woman, and there are plenty of qualified African American women out there for the job.
Can I interrupt you really quickly and ask, what do you think about his statement that it is going to be a woman? How do you think about that?
I'm good with that. I think that it's a good balance. They bring different perspectives. They have different the just out of their biology, they have different views of the world. And I l Yeah, and I like that, that balance. I like the balance that that brings. And so, um, and I mean, to me, if my ideal pick would have been, I mean, maybe up until about a month ago, but even still, I think the overall picture would have been Amy Klobuchar. That would have been my preferred, pick, only because I think politically she lines up, she brings the ticket more to the middle. Not that, Joe Biden is any kind of, big time liberal or anything, because he's not.
Right.
I mean, he really isn't. But
Far from a leftist, yeah.
right, exactly, and, no matter how they wanna paint him. Now, I think that he had to run to the left of what he normally would to get the nomination. But having said that, I think that would have still, said that, "Hey, I'm still more of a centrist." And kind of, the pick of Amy Klobuchar, I would probably equate as closely as to Clinton picking, Al Gore. And, because they were very, politically moderate. Both of them were. Both from the South, both politically moderate. They actually brought, I think they made a shift in the Democratic Party, in that sense. And, but I mean, it's a unique situation. But this is such an important election, and I think this VP pick is the most important one in a generation, at least. Um,
I agree, yeah.
Given how old Biden is, given the fact that he's already pretty much said he's gonna only be a one-term president,
Yeah,
you're basically picking who the next Democratic nominee is gonna be in 2024, I think, or the presumptive nominee. So that's what makes this pick so important. I think that's why the establishment is probably very much involved in this pick. I know that the leading candidate has been Kamala Harris. I know that's been a very popular, pick. I don't know if that would be the greatest pick. Yeah, I mean, I'm very familiar with her, obviously being from California, so I'm familiar with her politics and her history. And I think that there's enough dirt. You're gonna get dirt on no matter what. I mean, if you're a public figure, you're gonna have dirt attached to you.
yeah, it's an
Um,
impossible job, I think.
exactly. But I think though that she's more open to attacks than others, and I think that the way she attacked Biden in the primaries would come back to haunt Biden.
You
Because
spoke about that on your
yeah,
podcast.
yeah. Basically, what I said was, hey, all they have to do is just play clips of, they're all the commercials the Republicans are going to have is just playing clips of Kamala Harris saying
Right.
bad crap about Biden. That's all it's going to be,
Yeah.
and it'd be very effective. I think that Stacey Abrams has been mentioned as a possibility. One possibility that I've liked. I mean, if you liked, people that like Pete Buttigieg, he was a good, a solid candidate. A lot of people thought, obviously, but his experience as kind of a small town mayor, politically, I mean, I guess if you compare him to Trump, I guess he has more experience, right? But that made me think about, well, what about Keisha Lance Bottoms, the mayor of Atlanta?
Right.
She's definitely come into prominence over the current Black Lives Matter movement,
Absolutely.
a
Yeah.
very powerful voice. I don't know if she's quite ready yet, because I think you got to have somebody that's going to be ready on day one. But I think she's a rising star in the Democratic Party. I hope that they continue to promote her and maybe get her into the national political scene soon. But I just don't know if this is the right time yet for her. But I think she definitely has potential. Um, Karen Bass has been another pick, and
Right.
she did a lot here in California during our fiscal crises of the late 2000s, early 2010s. But she got a leadership award for her handling of that because she was the Speaker of the Assembly at the time, when those budget negotiations were happening with Arnold Schwarzenegger. But I think that the one that really flew to the top of my radar after reading that article I was talking about from Tucker Carlson, is Susan Rice.
Oh, I was waiting for you to mention her. Yeah.
They are deathly afraid of Susan Rice. She's basically the Democratic Condoleezza Rice.
Yeah, she absolutely is.
So they would have a hard time if she is the pick. She's got the experience, she's got the foreign relations experience, and that is gonna be because of all the damage I think that the Trump administration, Trump himself more or less, has done to our foreign relations stance. You need somebody that's gonna be really strong, that's gonna be able to repair those relationships. And I think if there's anybody that's being considered, and I know she's one of the ones being considered, she's probably got the best experience when it comes to that kind of thing.
So qualified.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, it might be an obvious question. I worry about Benghazi with her because it was such a sticky issue. Do you think that that will affect her chances at all? Do you think
That is gonna be one thing that's gonna hurt her. Yes, absolutely, you're right. Because they were so successful at making that an issue, with Hillary Clinton.
Yeah,
So being able to attach Benghazi to her, is gonna be, and how that all went down and the cover up and things like that, that's gonna be a problem. You are absolutely correct. And I wasn't really thinking about that aspect of it, but, that is gonna be, something that's gonna have to be worked out. Again, I think that people that are gonna that are gonna be the most boisterous of that, though, we're gonna vote for Biden anyway,
for
honestly.
sure.
I
Yeah,
mean, I think that, you talked about Kanye West's, candidacy for president. I think that it could I don't know who that would hurt. I think it would hurt the Democrats more than the Republicans, but I think what he would do is he would draw more people to the polls that wouldn't otherwise vote. I think that would be more of what he would do.
young people being engaged for the first time. Yeah.
Yeah, like, they probably weren't gonna if it weren't for him, they wouldn't be showing up. So
Yeah.
he's gonna add to the total numbers, but I don't think he's gonna necessarily like, "Oh, well, now that Ye's running, maybe I'm gonna vote for him instead of Biden," That I don't see
Get
that.
my Yeezys.
Yeah.
Did you ever listen to Pod Save the World? They might be a little too liberal for you. It's the crooked media guys that used to work in the Obama administration. Ben Rhodes is one of the co-hosts, Tommy Vitor,
No,
John.
I haven't heard that one.
They're pretty liberal, but they just made an episode talking about the potential of a Susan Rice VP pick and how much political capital she has, how tough she is on foreign policy to beat, and she is just so qualified. I think that's one of the things that we are missing. Biden has all the experience in the world. I think Pence has some, but then you have the outsider in Trump, and Susan Rice would be an interesting element in that. So it'll be fascinating to see who he announces.
Yeah, but it is such a big pick. I mean, it really is important because, I mean, this is the probably, the vice presidents are important because I think Trump's not in good health, in exactly the greatest health either. So, there's a possibility he doesn't make it through a second term, especially if he starts going off the deep end with some of the stuff that he's doing, you know, is the 25th Amendment off the table in a second
Right.
term? I don't know. I don't know necessarily. I think that the whoever he picks is gonna be enough to either hurt him or help him win this thing in those swing states, in those critical states. Because guess what? I can call it right now, Biden has won California.
It's not a surprise.
I'm
Michigan,
already
though.
calling it now. That state I'm calling, okay?
Oh my God, breaking news. This is
Yeah.
revolutionary.
I did try it. She was married.
And then he said, "Don't you just love the smell of napalm in the morning?"
We be faster than Django.
We are in the apocalypse now.
Did try it. She was married.
So I think the biggest issue that's facing us right now that's not getting talked about enough, and I think it is the root cause of other issues we have in our society, is the mental health crisis. My wife is wrapping up her studies to be a marriage and family therapist.
Awesome. My dad is one. Good
Oh,
for
okay,
her.
nice. That's cool. Yeah.
Congratulations to her.
Yeah, she's finishing up her schooling, and she's got all of her, experience time that she has to do, all the hours she has to put in. That was really, I've always thought that before, but now, like, talking to her through her studies and things that she's learning has really made me realize, you look at the increase that we've had in mass shootings and homelessness, those 2 issues, which are such, those are issues that impact, the local level a lot. Obviously, it enters the national conversation, but really where that's being dealt with is in your state, county, and local governments, and a lot of it can be attributed back. You can see where these things started. They started, we want to talk about it, whether it's economics and things like that. That can be a part of it, but really the root cause that causes it to really be a huge issue is mental health. And you look at how we've gone away from funding mental health in this country, and I think you look at there's almost a direct correlation between those 2 things. And so, to me, I think the investment of that, they're talking about defund the police, and, some of there's a lot of police resources being used for the homeless. Like, in the city I work in, we actually have a team that's dedicated to working with the homeless, not necessarily, not arresting them, not,
Nothing
they're actually,
punitive.
yeah, it's not negative. They actually go and talk to them and try to, and they know them. They're on a first name basis with a lot of the guys that they see around a lot.
That it's so humanizing because they're
Yeah, yeah, and so they've been trained by mental health professionals on how to deal with various mental health issues. And so, to me, I think we don't invest nearly enough in mental health, and I think that would just that investment alone would, I think, solve, or at least help to solve, some of the other issues that we have in our society. So that's the thing that, to me, is something that's, does not get enough attention. There's always talk about it, and there are a lot of people acknowledge that it's an issue, but when it comes to actually coming up with solutions, that's where the conversation stops. And I think that's where it needs to start. It needs to be, how do we address this? How do we fix this? Because then it can lead to so many other things that might that'll help our society and solve a lot of the issues that we always constantly debate about. Like, why can't we fix these problems? It's because you're not dealing with this core issue. That's why. And so that's where I think that we need to focus more attention on.
I so appreciate you bringing that up, and I think you're so right on yeah, people talk about, physical health and exercising and eating right, but that's also maintaining what's up here. Yeah, my dad, he had a private practice in Reno for a number of years. He was a marriage and family therapist and a substance abuse counselor. And as a vet, he would work with a lot of veterans and first responders. And the problem, I think this has changed over the past couple of years, actually, but a lot of people felt weak or vulnerable admitting that they needed to speak to someone. And then it's a process to find the right fit for you, right? If you go to talk to a counselor, it doesn't have to be the first person you come across. Like your wife might be a great fit for someone because of her background and experience, and someone else might find, a male a better fit for them.
Right.
And I think that sort of reaching out, admitting that it's okay to sort of work these things through. It's just like, I think, a tune-up on your car. Even if you don't have an underlying issue, it's okay to do that maintenance. And it really impacts your personal relationships, your professional working relationships. And then, like you're saying, these meta issues in society, because we see the data with homelessness and mental health, right? And the correlation there. And these kids that are feeling isolated and alone, and rates of gun violence. And I think you're right, that is such an important element. And if we can keep sort of momentum in that field and provide people resources to access therapy, because it can be expensive,
Well,
right?
right, exactly. It can be expensive, and my wife has discovered just that the process of licensing is so convoluted. And obviously it's gonna vary state by state, but in California, it's so convoluted, that it does create a barrier for people to get into the field. I think there's a lot of people that wanna help, and she said a lot of people don't make it through the program partially because of the state and the way that they have to license people in the state and the barriers that creates. That, a lot of the work the work she's doing right now is a non-paid internship. And luckily we have the resources that she can do that. Not a lot of people have that, and that's a problem. And so it's not just the affordability for the patients, but it's also the affordability for the people that actually wanna get into the field and can't because there's various barriers there. I think
Absolutely.
if we wanna talk about, whether it's funding college and things like that, funding education, I think that there should be incentives we need to give incentives in certain fields where we need people, and we need to give them the resources to be able to do it. And I think this is one of those prime areas that should be. Even with all the coronavirus stuff going on, that's been a big drain on people's mental health as well.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And you know what I mean? So, like, and one of the things that I've told my staff, my employees is, you know, we're talking about all these measures that we're trying to take to protect us physically from this virus in terms of customer contact and hand sanitizer being everywhere and social distancing and masks and things like that. And I said, but don't forget the mental health aspect of this thing as well. We have resources available for our employees, and I encourage them to use those resources because all the fear that people have with this, sometimes maybe all you need is just to go talk to somebody that knows how to deal with this kind of thing. And that'll make you feel that'll keep you more at ease, and it actually probably keeps you safer because you may not make rational decisions, right? So if your mental acuity is there because you're getting the proper help, then maybe you're gonna do better, you're gonna be more effective at protecting your physical health as a result.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. That's so important. Okay, and then our last segment, because it's not all bad news, but first coffee. Do you have anything to add here?
I do. You talked about an organization. I wanna talk about one thing that I've talked about on my show a couple times. I'm a huge, huge fan of Big Brother, and it is starting up this week, and I'm super, super excited about that. Like, I will be watching live tomorrow at 9 o'clock on CBS. It's gonna be awesome. It's gonna be people we know. It's gonna be an all-star edition. I think that's a really good move, given what's going on,
Yep.
and so I'm just stoked. I'm super excited for it.
Right on, that's something to look forward to for sure.
New TV. It's
I
great.
know, imagine that. And then you can do it safely.
Right, yeah. It's this show is made for quarantine.
Right.
This show is about quarantine. I mean, that's what
So
it's
fitting.
about.
It's so fitting. That's awesome. Well, thank you so, so much for coming on the podcast. Thank you for your time. Can you let listeners know where to find you? And I will obviously include links and
Yes,
everything.
thank you. So, my website is themoderatePodcast.com, so it links just directly to my podcast homepage. where you have all the subscription links, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify. There's about a dozen of them there. I'm on Twitter at the Mod Podcast One. I'm on Facebook at the Moderate Podcast, and I'm on Instagram at the Moderate Podcast. So I'm all over the social media. But hopefully, and obviously, I thank you for providing me this platform and for the time. It's been fun. I've had a great time, and hopefully we could do this again. Hopefully, maybe we'll have you on my show one day.
I would love that. Absolutely. Thank you so much. I
Thank
so
you.
appreciate it. Thanks again to Jimmy for coming on the pod. Everyone, please go check out the Moderate Podcast. See, that wasn't so hard. He and I don't agree on everything, and our politics can be quite different, but what a pleasant conversation. No screaming, more agreeing, I say. I'm going to leave you guys with a song called Be Fun by the artist Be Fun from their album The Town Shop. Have a magical week and get into some good trouble, everybody.
Take it real soon. You know we got what you need, baby. So take it, move along. I said we got what you need, honey. Come and groove along. Come on. Rolling on that highway, ease up. Wow. Come on. And move along. Come on. Said babe. I said babe. Oh honey. Come and move along. You gotta feel it.